Welcome to another episode of the Rust Belt Apartment Podcast presented by the Cooper Multifamily team, where we discuss all things apartments with a keen eye on the Midwest's Rust Belt region. I'm your moderator, Peter Graylis. As always, I'm joined by my teammate and co-host, Gary Cooper. We're pleased to welcome today's guests, Bryan McCann and Willis Croker. Bryan and Willis recently joined the Colliers Pittsburgh office, and we're happy to have them. Bryan received his undergrad from Duquesne University in 2003, earned a law degree in 2006 from Duquesne as well, ultimately earned an MBA in cybersecurity and finance in 2015, from the George Washington University. Prior to joining Colliers, Bryan worked for the FBI for 11 years. In 2017, Bryan returned to Pittsburgh to begin his career in commercial real estate. Since then, Bryan has led the capital market teams and concentrated his practice on multifamily transactions. Willis received his undergrad degree from the University of Dayton, go Flyers, in economics and marketing. He started his career in commercial real estate in 2019. Since then, Willis and Bryan have worked together to advise private capital and institutional clients on all matters related to capital markets transactions. He joins Colliers as Vice President of Capital Markets, Multifamily. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
It's our absolute pleasure. Gary had mentioned that he had taken some time to have dinner with you guys probably about a month ago now. And shortly after the dinner, he popped over to my desk and said, "Hey, I've got a great next set of guests for the podcast." So we certainly thought it'd be fun and informative to have a group that operates in a very similar space that we do, in a city that's got a lot of similarities that Cleveland has as well. So it's kind of our Cleveland-Pittsburgh show. Willis showed up with his Steelers gear. We'll look past that. But again, guys, thanks for joining us. We're looking forward to having kind of a fun conversation here today.
And I did set it up. It was like Pittsburgh v. Cleveland. So Willis came to play. Unlike either of our respective football teams, that might not be properly said.
True.
But we're super excited to have you guys not only on the podcast but part of the Colliers team. I think as we're growing our platform and making an impact here in the Midwest, it's great to have a very competent Rust Belt counterpart in Pittsburgh. I don't know if Pittsburgh qualifies as the Midwest, does it, or is it considered East?
So it's kind of like it's really the gateway. We've kind of always said that we kind of hold the hands between the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic. So depending on who you talk to, right? I mean, we're only 12 miles from the Ohio border, which a lot of people don't realize. If you kind of head to Cranberry and head directly west, you're pretty much in Ohio. And our markets only being really an hour and 45 minutes away from each other. They're pretty close, but yeah, depending on who you talk to, they'll say, hey, you're part of the Mid-Atlantic or the East, or you're part of the Southeast, or you're part of the Northeast, or you're part of the Midwest. So kind of, which I think is kind of actually emblematic of why both of our cities are kind of so special is, we talk about this a lot. Our cities are kind of geographically located in some very key parts of the country that can't be replicated.
No doubt.
So when you look at a 1 day's drive from either of our markets, right, 500 miles, you have almost half of the North American population, which a lot of people don't realize. You can get to basically any major city, and a 2-hour flight, you're pretty much at any major city other than what's on the West Coast. So strategically, I think that's, I'm sure we'll get into this kind of why Cleveland and Pittsburgh have really started emerging on the multifamily stage, and I think we'll continue to do so for the next few years to come.
Yeah,
Well
I agree completely with that. So obviously I was joking whether you guys are part of the Midwest or not, but Pittsburgh is certainly part of the Rust Belt. And that's what this podcast is. So who cares about the Midwest or East or Mid-Atlantic? What matters to us is the Rust Belt, where returns and all things are possible still in multifamily. And as Peter sort of set that up, and I think before we start talking about the real estate stuff, I mean, FBI agent, 11 years. Tell us more about that, where you were located, and there's got to be some really good stories there.
Yeah. So, I mean, interesting story. It's kind of like, like every 18-year-old, I knew exactly what I was going to do with my life and had my life planned out. And as I like to say, best made plans don't survive first contact. Um, I think I quoted that. I think, I think you can attribute that to me. But no, I was undergrad computer science and I wanted to get into cyber patent law. And when I got into it in law school, my second year, I started taking patent law courses. I kind of realized this probably wasn't the path that I really wanted to do. And I was sitting there scratching my head. And I was a volunteer firefighter actually during law school in McCann, which is a suburb just north of Pittsburgh. And a few of us would get together on Saturdays for breakfast. And, I was kind of, sitting there lamenting that, my career ambitions pretty much went out the window. Actually, when I realized what it meant. And one of the other volunteer firefighters was actually an FBI agent, and kind of grabbed me in a headlock and said, "Hey, I got an idea. I kind of know your personality. I kind of see what you're interested in, and you seem to have an educational background that would be suited." Because at the time, and they still are, the Bureau was recruiting attorneys and computer scientists pretty heavily.
Sure.
So that was my second year of law school. It's a long process to apply. So I applied toward the end of my second year, and luckily timing worked out, and I graduated on June 5th in 2006. And I got a call a week later that said, pack up your stuff, and we got a class date for you at Quantico. So that was the start of kind of the career there. Worked counterterrorism, counterintelligence, but always had kind of an interest in real estate and finance, my entire time there. So in 2017, we decided to make the move back to Pittsburgh. My wife, who I had met in New York City at the time, because my first office was Cincinnati. Then I was in Philadelphia. Then I went down and worked at the Hoover Building, the lovely, beautiful building in Washington, D.C. And then I was up in New York as well, too. Working. So during my career, I worked counterterrorism and counterintelligence and advised a number of senior FBI officials. But then in New York, I met my wife, and we moved back to Pittsburgh. She had never been there before, so she got the full Rust Belt experience.
She an East Coaster, Bryan?
She was from New Jersey area originally, but she went to Dickinson undergrad, and then afterwards she did her graduate studies at St. John's and was in New York City for 10 years. So she was pretty much almost native to New York City at the time. So she had been there long enough, which I said she's a much better person than me. She's director of child psychology at Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh.
Oh, very cool.
Really interesting. So yeah, but I think she had a little bit, coming back to the Midwest, it's a little bit different pace. So, but now we've settled in, and we had our first 1 month ago. So, we're excited. So.
Congrats. So 11 years at the Bureau, was it just time for a change?
So I always, you move up, right? I was started off as a field agent, Cincinnati being my first office. As you move up, you kind of get into management, you get a little bit more into the bureaucracy and a little bit more, away from the stuff that you probably joined to do. So as I went up and kind of moved up, I was looking to kind of go into the private sector. I had a couple different offers, doing some different things in the cybersecurity field. But I always had a passion for real estate. I actually, during my time in the Bureau, I went on to iTunes University and took almost every real estate finance course that I could find. They had a bunch out of Columbia. So I got into that, started buying small stuff myself, and just absolutely loved, 6 units, 12 units where we could find it, some in South Carolina, some in Pittsburgh, and absolutely loved the entire multifamily process, and kind of moved back and said, hey, this is something that I really want to do and kind of make a career out of. Since it was kind of like, I was in it for 11 years, and it was that time where if you stay much longer, you're probably going to stay till retirement, or if you're going to make a move, it's probably time to make the move at that kind of mark. So.
Okay. Very interesting. Willis, I know it's kind of a tough story to follow. Tell us about getting drunk at the ghetto at University of Dayton.
I'm pretty sure I have a lot of great memories there. Just don't remember a lot of it. I'm pretty sure I had a good time.
But Willis, quickly, your background. So from Pennsylvania, went to school at UD.
Yep. So grew up in Ligonier, Pennsylvania, which is a very small town, about 3,000 people. People might be familiar. There's a small town about 10 minutes down the road called Latrobe, Pennsylvania, the home of Fred Rogers and Arnold Palmer. If you look at my resume, you will see a bullet point there that says I have had an Arnold Palmer made by Arnold Palmer. Very proud of that
Wow,
fact.
that's pretty
Just for all the
cool.
listeners out there, it's if you want to go by the master, it's iced tea first and then lemonade.
Good to know. Good to
Yeah,
know.
so then I think we touched on earlier, is Pittsburgh a Midwestern town or Mideastern? I definitely say Midwestern. In my time in Dayton, Ohio, I definitely would say there's a very similar vibe around the people. You talk to your neighbors, you know the neighbors. I frankly don't think I've ever lived anywhere where I frankly locked my front door. Trust the neighbors and safe neighborhoods. I've really enjoyed it. And then, to be honest, never really had my plan in college was never to go into real estate. I had a job lined up in DC at a place where I'd interned. And about 2 weeks prior to graduating, I got a call that said I was a budget cut before I got there.
Wow.
So luckily I hadn't signed a lease or anything yet. But at the time I had a cousin working in SVN who shared an office with Bryan. And I get a call from him and says, hey, there's a person in my office that he's looking to hire someone. Would you be interested in an interview? Well, I said, absolutely. I had 2 weeks prior to college. I don't want to move back home with my parents. So I said,
Sure.
absolutely. Give me the interview, please. He said, okay, well, it's in 15 minutes. Good luck. And so I came in the industry very green as far as knowing the real estate industry and everything, but I did my best to sell Bryan on my ability to learn and the fact that I'm coachable. And past 4 years of Bryan kind of been thrown into the fire, and it's been a fantastic learning experience. I've grown to love the industry and the opportunities it's provided me.
Hey, Willis, could you share too the one time what happened when you golfed with Arnold Palmer?
Oh, come on now.
Oh, yes, please.
So I was, so we were down golfing in Bay Hill in Florida, and me and my buddy were playing, and I think it was hole 6 or 7. All of a sudden, this golf cart comes behind us. And what do you know? It's Arnold Palmer right behind us. And just for a little context, I went to grade school with his granddaughter. So I had known him and met him a few times. And he comes up behind us and he's like, yeah, do you mind if I watch for a hole or two? And I was like, I'm 16 years old at the time, but I know, speaking to my grandfather, my father, I know how big of a figure Arnold Palmer is. So I go to tee off, and by no means have I ever been a good golfer. So I'm expecting a slice, a hook, who knows, but my hands are shaking. I go take a big swing, hoping to hit the perfect drive in front of him, and I miss the ball. I turn around about as embarrassed as can be, and Arnold Palmer just cool and collected looks at me and goes, it happens all the time. So eventually, I think I ended smacked a couple balls into the woods, one into the water in front of him, but got the opportunity to play a whole golf with Arnold Palmer. So it's pretty fun.
Good story, man. Real good story.
Now, and you're both of you originally from Pittsburgh, and I think your families have been in Pittsburgh for a while as well.
Yeah, mine's from I was originally about an hour away, but Wheeling, West Virginia. But I kind of considered Pittsburgh home after undergrad and law school. When I would come back and visit, I kind of stayed in Pittsburgh and would make the quick drive down to Wheeling to visit family and friends and then back in. But and in a lot of my immediate family is still in Wheeling.
Gotcha. And I only said that because I was with you gentlemen, and we were at the Duquesne Club in Pittsburgh, which obviously is a very famous place. But I think, Willis, your grandmother was the first woman member at the Duquesne Club.
It was. And so my family, my mom's side of the family is from the area. Actually grew up around the Seven Springs area. My great grandfather was actually the one who founded Seven Springs. And so that was a family run business until it was sold to Bob Nutting in 2006. So as soon as I could walk, I got a pair of skis put on my feet.
Sure.
And then my dad was from the Baltimore area, who moved to Pittsburgh around 1970. So we got a lot of roots here in Pittsburgh, a lot of family in the area, love the area.
Fantastic. Well, one of the things I wanted to bring up is we talk about the similarities in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, and obviously a lot of folks go to obviously the short 2-hour drive on the turnpike between the cities. A lot of people will talk about obviously some of the sports teams, although certainly the Penguins and Pirates don't necessarily compete against the Guardians and Cavaliers, but we do have our football teams that have never seemed to be both good at the same time. But if you look at it, so the population of Cleveland the Cleveland MSA right now is 1,761,000 people. The MSA population of Pittsburgh is 1,699,000 people. So again, only a little over 60,000 people separate Cleveland and Pittsburgh in terms of the MSA. In both cities, their peak population was 1970, literally the year 1970 for both of them. And Pittsburgh's apartment market's 146,000 market rate apartments, and Cleveland is 169,000 market rate apartments. So again, a lot of similarities in terms of the size, the population, I think the background in economic factors. Tell us more, especially because a lot of our folks are not folks that, have seen the Pittsburgh market, because velocity's never been huge in Pittsburgh. But talk a little bit about the apartment market there, what you're seeing, and where the opportunity you think lies.
I think it's interesting. So we talk about this a lot, and we'll do a presentation a lot for new institutional investors into Pittsburgh. And if you really look at Pittsburgh, and I think Cleveland's probably very similar in the way, we were obviously more of the industrial town when you talk about the early 1900s and through the mid 2000 or the 20th century. And then we kind of went through a change. And I think when Pittsburgh, you hit it on the nail on the head, is a lot of what we had was old historical buildings and old historical ownership that didn't have a lot of institutional appetite. And there was a concern for a long time that if an institutional player came into the market and made a purchase, were they going to be able to exit? Was there going to be enough of a market when they went to exit? So even though the returns looked great, was there going to be a liquidity trap? So we saw a couple things, and we point this out a lot, is, when you look at 2007 on the national stage, it's kind of when people started scratching their heads and saying, hey, this MSA Pittsburgh, it didn't drop. Most of the MSAs had this huge drop. And it's because we just used to chug along at 2-3% growth year over year. We never saw a huge spike. We never saw a huge decline. So everybody was like, that's kind of interesting, right? This is a market that seems to not, be able to be hit in an economic downturn as much. And then if you look, I think what really happened is in 2013, 2014, Uber announced that they would put their advanced technology division in Pittsburgh, which is their self-driving cars. And it's really for one reason. It was they were looking for the talent that was coming out of Carnegie Mellon. And if you look at Carnegie Mellon, it's been the top in artificial intelligence and robotics for years. I mean, this isn't something new in the last decade. This is really, stemming back to when I was in college. The thing is not that many people cared at the time about artificial intelligence and robotics. And now it is really being at the forefront and the cutting edge of technology. So you saw this stark shift where Pittsburgh went from this industrial town, old sleepy town on the rivers with a bunch of steel mills, to really being an area that had some budding technology come out of it. Now, when you shift that to the apartment market, what does that mean? And I think what's really interesting is we did not build a lot, and we did not build high quality, what we would call Class A product much in the 90s and the early 2000s. So we basically had this huge void of newer built product that needs to be filled. And I think now it's starting to be filled. And we see, if you talk to someone who's from Pittsburgh and you see the pipeline, and everyone's like, are we overbuilding? And the answer is really, we're not even caught up to where we should be. We actually have this huge demand for product that continues to come down. And now we see the kind of the acceleration of that technology boom that's happening in Pittsburgh. And you see, you have Uber, Argo AI, Aurora, those groups that kind of came to Pittsburgh in the downstream industries. And then, recently Duolingo, they went public. So you kind of have a unicorn coming out of Pittsburgh. So now you're starting to attract more and more attention from the West Coast technology firms and the VC firms that are coming into the city. And now we're seeing a number of institutional trades. So we don't have that concern for the liquidity trap anymore. So Pittsburgh is now on the radar because returns are still there and there's an exit. And most players are kind of, looking at that as well too. And, Gary, I'll kick that to you because you're the expert on Cleveland. I don't want to, pretend to know, as much as you in the market. So I'd be interested to see how you would say that would compare and contrast to what is happening in Cleveland as well.
Yeah, and that's the one place where we truly haven't turned the corner yet. So there's two things. There's the liquidity trap that you talk about is what does that exit look like, right? And then I think the second part that goes sort of hand in hand is, hey, what's the sales velocity? If I come into Pittsburgh, buy this 220 unit, 230 unit deal, can I get another 2, 3, 4 buildings there? So I have a 1,500 unit portfolio and can take advantage of some management efficiencies, get a regional there, not be, worried about, how in the world I'm going to manage this and so forth. And so that's certainly something that Cleveland shares with Pittsburgh in the sense that velocity number, you have a lot of folks coming into the market, especially on the institutional side. It's like, hey, I can't get the scale necessary to continue. I think the part of yours that was sort of answered is, hey, can there be decent exits? Is there an exit strategy? And I think it's back to what you said. There's always been institutional interest in Pittsburgh. Maybe even more so than Cleveland. And some of it has to do with the politics, the business. I think the way the community of Pittsburgh has come together to sort of turn, we obviously affectionately call this the Rust Belt podcast, but, Pittsburgh turned that corner well before Cleveland sort of embraced technology, embraced business, sort of the social and cultural institutions and the political folks getting along. We haven't quite figured that out in Cleveland yet, which again, I think held us back a little bit more. But, we're hopeful. There was some institutional stuff that's on the market, and we're hoping our trajectory starts to look a lot like Pittsburgh. Because again, as you said, it really gives you an opportunity once you can confirm, hey, there is an exit strategy. And biggest thing is in Pittsburgh is, again, you guys went from being a very sleepy, low velocity city to, you've had some decent sales. And I know you've been a big part of some of the major sales that have happened the last couple of years, but you've seen a big run up in Pittsburgh sales, right? In 19, 20, 21, through COVID and through today.
No, I definitely agree. And it's interesting that you brought it up too, because the political environment, I think, I know Pennsylvania is shifting, and I think Ohio is too, but please tell me, is like, I think they're looking to enact some more and more policies. I know Pennsylvania is on path to start cutting their corporate income tax to bring it down to kind of do further attraction policies. And I know Ohio has been kind of looking at different things that they could do, which I think there's so much synergy, I think, between our markets. I mean, Gary, we've been lucky enough where you've come out to Pittsburgh and I've been out there, and our respective clients are, they're making that drive back and forth pretty frequently now. So I think hopefully those policies that they kind of put in place will continue to kind of spur business growth for both of our cities, because I think we can benefit from each other. If both cities are rising, being less than 2 hours apart, there can be its own ecosystem. Obviously top-notch universities in Cleveland and top-notch universities in Pittsburgh too. So you have that whole tech eds and meds. You really have, some rounded out synergy between the two cities.
Does Pittsburgh have the healthcare presence that Cleveland has?
Massive.
Okay.
UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, is really, really a powerhouse when it comes, and they're marching mostly east. So they're kind of expanding eastward, all the way out through the state. We have over 700,000 square foot currently in development of wet lab space. So when you talk about biotech is now becoming a huge aspect. There's an area. Oakland is where University of Pitt and UPMC. So if you hear me refer to Oakland and Carnegie Mellon, those universities are all there. There's an area in South Oakland, which is a new kind of park, is where they're building a ton of wet lab space right now to kind of take advantage of some of the biotech research that's coming out of those universities and those healthcare systems, which is truly massive. And then you also have Allegheny Health Network. So we actually have two massive healthcare systems that are both in the city.
Are you seeing development follow those systems into communities like Oakland?
Yeah, the problem is there's no land available. One of the things that's, about Pittsburgh is we have a lot of hills, we have a lot of rivers. So you really can't go too far without going over a bridge or going through a tunnel, which it makes the area really interesting in a good way. The geography is just beautiful, especially this time of year in the fall, because you can usually look at the hills and the trees. But it makes public transportation and it makes development challenging because you have land constraints. And so Oakland is probably one of the hottest submarkets, that in the Strip District of Pittsburgh, where land is highly valuable and there's not a lot to come by. So it's difficult. I think we would see a lot more development if there was more land available, but you are constrained by that.
When I was selling a property in Pittsburgh, that goes back to early 2019. It was out in Moon Township, so right by the airport, right? And so the Shell cracker factory was just finishing up and starting to get going. How has that all gone? Because that was a $3, $4, $5 billion investment by Royal Dutch Shell.
Yeah, I mean, it's online and running, and I think it's doing well out there. And obviously, you see it keeps going up. I think we're at $1.2 billion in an airport renovation project. It might even be slightly higher now. So that's actually really interesting in kind of modernizing the Pittsburgh airport. I think with Shell Cracker, the interesting part is they're wondering if there's going to be more of those built along the river, which would kind of have its own ecosystem as well.
Yeah.
We talk about tech eds and meds being kind of in the core of Pittsburgh, but I think you hit on the key point there, Gary. We have this kind of like, I always call it the concentric circle around Pittsburgh of transportation and logistics. And Shell Crackers are the prime example of that. We have a number of major interstates, coming through our area, and then obviously the three rivers that come, the Monongahela and the Allegheny forming the Ohio. So I think all of that gives us a really interesting part for transportation and logistics. Shell Cracker is up and running. They've taken advantage of a lot of advanced technology. So a lot of their systems are automated. So it's not this high job growth. It is a job growth, but I think what would be interesting is if you see one or two more of those plants come online, and then the downstream industries that would come to follow. I think that's where it could get very interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing with the cracker plants, right? Is that, I think they end up with, and I'm not sure if it's for the plastics industry or there's something that basically they produce that's very difficult to transfer. So all of a sudden, you're getting a lot of sort of spin-offs and development that happen because you've got to be close to that plant. And it's sort of what's happening in the chip factories. So if you go, out in Phoenix, for example, there's probably $100 billion worth of chip factories being built, which it always amazes me because water is one of the biggest natural resources you need, and Phoenix is not where you think of for water resources. But what's really spinning off from them is the amount of you start thinking just the acetone, the etching, the stuff that they do. All these chemical companies and stuff have exploded in and around these. Developing and, not spending quite the B mark, but, they're building $200, $300, $400 million, facilities in and around these that do employ, much more than maybe the actual chip manufacturing does. So.
No, absolutely. And I think that's I think that's the interesting part on the cracker plant specifically is what would be the downstream industries and the support industries that come around it. And I think that could be a good opportunity for growth, depending on where we go with that in the future.
Yeah. Well, one of the most exciting projects that's being built right now in downtown Cleveland, and we've had, much like you, for 40 years, we didn't have much construction. And then if you look at the last 5 years, there's been a number of ground up, construction deals that have been built. But and they've got obviously have really had really good success. I think the occupancy numbers, I think the rent numbers have blown people away on what has been accomplished. Very, even during COVID, you had a little bit of a lull or maybe a speed bump, but it quickly came back. But one of the ones that I'm most excited about is a property called City Club Apartments, which is next to the City Club in Cleveland, the free speech organization. But, Jonathan Holtzman, who is, the owner of the City Club brand and the developer, I think is one of the most fantastic operators that really blends hospitality and multifamily extremely well. And I think you sold one of his Pittsburgh properties for him and have worked with them. Can you tell us what we should be expecting from City Club here in Cleveland and what your perception is, and maybe a little bit more about that deal, because that was really a marquee deal?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I actually met, Jonathan Holtzman actually when he was going through zoning of his new project in downtown Pittsburgh that is, I think, has not come out of the ground yet, but it's going to be at the old YMCA that was in downtown Pittsburgh. He's building over 250 units, which would be kind of a high-rise construction. But I got to meet him. We ended up working together on Southside City Club Apartments at the time, which was a very interesting. It was in Southside Works, which was a new development area. And we sold that last year. So in January of last year. Actually, I apologize. I'm losing track. It was January of this year. I'm losing track of my dates. Feels like the next year. So we sold that to Brookfield, which was an acquisition, which I think is kind of another emblematic of another big institutional multifamily owner that's coming into Pittsburgh and kind of making an establishment. And I think one of the things that's very interesting, I've had the privilege now of touring several of Jonathan Holtzman's products in Louisville and Cincinnati, and then obviously in Pittsburgh, as he's a real big believer on the blend of hospitality and apartments. And I think when you come to look at what are the renters demanding today, and it's a very highly amenitized product. And we talk a lot about this in Pittsburgh. I think actually there was the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We actually were interviewed last week, and they just ran an article on Sunday talking about some of the conversions in downtown. And one of the things that we talk about is square footage is becoming less and less important. So it's not how big the unit is, but it's really what does the building have to offer. And I think back in the day, and I even think when I was renting in DC and New York, the amenities would always sell me on living there, but I never used them. Right. I think I went into the club room twice in the time that I lived in DC. And I think it's because they had a coffee machine. A little bit of a caffeine junkie on our team. So, but I think that's changed a little bit. And you're seeing in the different hybrid work from home environment, when you're going into the office less, you're seeing a couple things. One is you want more of a sense of community of where you live. So having those areas that you can socialize in, I think is important. And I think also having some space outside your apartment, especially if it's not that large, to do work or just to move and be in a different space, whether you're doing Zoom calls or podcasts or whatever the case may be, you see that. And I think that's one of the things where, Jonathan Holtzman takes a lot of his inspiration from hotels and kind of looks at that. His decor is always top notch. I could never put it together. I don't have the design eye, but if you tour his products, it's always very interesting. And he does it very, very well and does it amenities. And I think the other thing too is we're seeing, I think in our market, where 65% of renters now have pets. And Jonathan's kind of a big on supporting pets as well too. I know he has kind of one of his projects is he does a number of, I think he has a nonprofit dedicated to wildlife. So he does a number of things there. So I think it's exciting. It's exciting. And he's also big on going into the urban core. And I think that's interesting for both of our markets as we're seeing more and more development in the urban core. So I'm sure it'll be a Class A top-notch product with high amenities for Cleveland. Which
yeah. Well, the Cincinnati project they mentioned, I mean, that's one of my favorite properties, and it's amazing what you've done from the rooftop down to the bakery and coffee shop that are in there, and took an old building, but yet the units themselves feel like you're in a very modern space and laid out in a great way. But I think the key thing is that, we've been talking about for the last 10 years, there's been, the amenities race in multifamily development, in multifamily space. And I think the differentiator with Jonathan, it's not the amenities itself, right? I mean, everybody's got what a dog wash or a pool or the workout facility or the club space or whatever. It's really the experience, right? So it's all about the experience, not the amenity itself. Because like you said, the amenity itself, take it or leave it or whatever, and everybody sort of has it. What differentiates the great operator now from the other folks? And it's the experience, how they can infuse life into, whether it's a workout area, whether it's, the restaurant or bakery or, pet shop or whatever, that they do there. And I think Jonathan's just as good as anybody at being able to do that.
Yeah, I think, it's, I think if you talk to him, he'll tell you, if you stay in a great hotel, right? If you stay in, a high-end Marriott or a Four Seasons, as you said, Gary, it's the experience, right? It's when you're walking through, I think I remember reading a Dale Carnegie book, and he was saying that he was staying in a Ritz, and he was walking through one time, he was giving a presentation, and he made the comment to somebody, he's like, "Oh, I don't think I have markers." And it happened to be a maintenance employee who basically stopped what he was doing and went out and found markers for them. And he found out later, like, this wasn't his job, but it was the point of, like, when your employees are taking ownership of your guests or your renters experience, I think that's a huge thing. And I think that's kind of something that, he preaches a little bit, because when you remember that, right, those are memorable moments where they kind of go above and beyond, and you're surrounded by great top-notch amenities. But like you said, the experience of it is just amazing.
And that's why I think the apartment business has such legs. It's much more, now we're doing it, if you start, and obviously home interest rates and some other things have gone in the wrong direction as far as seeing expansion of that. But I think even if rates would have stayed the same, because of how apartments are being built and how they're catering to people's, lifestyle and experience, they're like a real option. It's not like a full, before it was, renter by necessity, or like, I couldn't find it, so I couldn't do this. And I think now it's all renter by choice, and they're choosing with their pocketbook in terms of, experience and lifestyle. And I think then, we've seen that, folks that have like the workforce housing product that have been able to up their game a little bit and offer some things that the other typical workforce housing doesn't, gives them a huge advantage. And it's more than just the tile backsplash or the new LVT flooring. Like you said, they're bringing some of the experiential kind of things into that and giving people choices. And when you give people choices, especially in the workforce housing product, these folks don't get a lot of choices, and they might not be, renters by, the renters by necessity rather than renters by choice. And you start giving that experience or that lifestyle, you've got them for a much longer time period and a much better quality tenant, I think, moving forward.
When you were saying that, is we have a great operator that's come into Pittsburgh. We've sold him a couple products, which is Post Road, and they're in that workforce housing space. And, they bought, basically almost a small community of different apartment buildings. And one of the first things they did was construct a clubhouse to kind of give that workforce housing a little bit more amenitized product feel. And as you said, more and more renters are now renters by choice. It allows them flexibility. It allows them not have to worry about maintenance issues, especially, as work becomes more and more demanding sometimes. It's one less thing that they have to worry about. And it gives you a sense of community, because if you're working in your own home and you don't leave your home, like we, a lot of us did during COVID, it can be very isolating, especially if you don't have an office to go to every day. And if you're being there less, at least you're getting more of a sense of a community around your apartment building as well, too. And you mentioned maybe we can, we'll have to put a bug out, see if we can get, since Jonathan Holtzman has product in both of our markets, maybe we can get him to come on and be a guest on the podcast here.
There you go.
So,
Jonathan, you listening?
Would be a treat for guests and our listeners, because, again, I just think he's a genius in what he's doing right now and for the market. Pittsburgh, obviously, the capital markets are very disrupted right now. There's a lot of things going on. Who's the typical buyer in Pittsburgh now, and where do you think the opportunities are going to be, given that you have a new playing field in terms of LTV, in terms of interest rate, in terms of, where the opportunity exists?
So it's interesting, is the typical buyer now is, The only category that we have not seen come into Pittsburgh yet, which we thought we were, and it has not, is really the DSTs. So the Delaware Statutory Trust, right? So we haven't seen, and we've talked to many of those, but you look at some of the, the big DSTs like Inland, and then we haven't seen them make an entry into the market yet. Otherwise, pretty much we have seen institutional, we have seen syndicates, we have seen the funds, we have seen a lot of private capital. Regional private capital is starting to scratch their head a little bit because we are starting to see returns start to compress, which the whole country saw, to be
Sure.
fair. But they were starting to compress, and now they're having to start to compete with institutional capital coming out of New York, Boston, or even the West Coast. So I think we will continue to see that. One of the interesting things I think for both of our markets is we're calling it the snapback a little bit. We're seeing capital that kind of during COVID, you saw a lot of money flooded into the Sun Belt. And obviously the returns were getting pretty tight down there. I think we were talking with a couple groups that, somebody told me the other day they bought a 3.3 cap in Florida. Someone else bought a 2.9 cap, at the height of, when the returns were really getting compressed. And then you see that kind of things are like, well, hey, wait a minute, I can still get a return in Pittsburgh or Cleveland, right? And we're starting to develop an institutional exit. So I think that's where we're seeing more and more of these institutional groups that were kind of flooding down into the Southeast, and kind of going in that area. We're actually seeing that capital work back up. And I think that's where, we've been very successful. And I say we, as the bigger platform here, including you, is Gary and stuff.
Yeah.
We're able to reach out as we don't take this myopic view that we know everyone. We utilize the resources that are kind of like behind us so that we can provide local market expertise, but pull capital in from areas where capital has not come before. And I think that's, and for the listeners that don't know, Gary and I, we're our two teams are kind of working on some stuff together because we're seeing things kind of, back and forth. And I think that's what's really, really exciting as, we kind of look at that and we leverage that larger platform and those larger relationships, to kind of pull capital from different areas. But Pittsburgh's really, really open. I would like to see some of the DSTs come in. I think they would do well for their investor base, but that's the only one that we really haven't seen come into the area quite yet. So.
Yeah, and now you sort of broken that institutional glass ceiling. I think you will see that because of their fiduciary duty and sort of their very conservative nature because of again, just obviously the structure and the setup that I think you'll see that a little bit before we see it in here in Cleveland. But again, I think we will follow along. Well, as we sort of wrap up here, is there any deals that you want to tell our listeners about that you guys have going on in Pittsburgh right now that might be attractive to importing capital up and down the turnpike here?
Well, I think right now, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of individuals take a pause, until we come out until the next year. I think everybody's waiting to see what the treasuries do. So there's a number of things that we've worked on as a BOVs that are out. We have a number of scattered sites. We still predominantly catch a ton of scattered site portfolios because we have generational ownership that's acquired these things over years. And Willis's favorite product, because he gets to run around and take care of, like we said, I think we were talking before the call, Peter, where we have, we're currently under contract on a 384 unit, 214 tax ID portfolio. We have another one.
A lot of paperwork.
Yeah. Willis, what's the one we have in market right now?
The one we have in the market right now, it's kind of in the greater Pittsburgh area. It's 141 properties, 212 units. So again, it's a very typical ownership story in Pittsburgh is this family started buying duplexes and triplexes 20, 30 years ago, and it went well for them. So they bought the next duplex and triplex, bought the next one. And then you look up, they come to us in 2020. It's like, oh, by the way, we're currently at 141 properties total with 212 units. Where it's just that it's over time, they keep building and building and building. And then when they go look for the exit, we have quite the scatter site on our hands.
Yeah. And you guys have only been with us, is it even 4 weeks now?
We came over in August. So yeah, I think it's going fast. So yeah, I think we got a couple months under the belt. Been plugged in and lucky enough to meet some really good people on the platform who've actually accelerated kind of getting us integrated, yourselves included, which has just been awesome. So
fantastic.
And I'll tell you, it's been fun kind of coming back and forth. Gary, I know you had us out in Cleveland and, we had some fun with photoshopping some jerseys, Browns jerseys and Steelers jerseys on each other. But I'm in touch with Cleveland every time I come there. I think, it's just really, really interesting. I learned something new about the city. I have friends out there, obviously, as you know. I always have to give a shout out to Joe's Deli out in Rocky River, which is one of my places to visit.
One of the best delis in the city.
Yeah, the best corned beef that I can have. So it's kind of funny. Very close friends, and every time I come out, I get sent home with a couple pounds of corned beef. So I think I gain about 3 pounds every time I take the trip. But Gary, you've always
that's the way to do it, man.
And I tell you, I mean, the downtown, I think, we last time we were out there, we stayed at the Marriott downtown.
Okay.
The 9, yeah. And you kind of see, and it's kind of interesting as you start to see that hybrid of condos and, hotels and hospitality. We talked about that with, City Club. And now we're seeing kind of that first project being proposed in Pittsburgh as well, the Golf Tower, where they're looking at potentially doing a hotel and apartments combined with it together. So I think that's something that is going to be interesting in both of our markets as we move forward to kind of see that trend is going to continue. So,
is that Golf Tower project a conversion?
As an office, so we're converting a lot of our historical office space.
Sure.
The article in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette actually on Sunday talked about, I think we're at, Willis, if you remember correctly, we're at 60-some% office still downtown when you look by square footage, and some individuals have a goal of getting to 50-50 apartments and office and of course CBD, which is an interesting metric that kind of comes out there. So.
Yeah, then even with still a lot of building going on downtown, I believe last time we looked at the pipeline, we're sitting right around 1,100 units of proposed projects and everything that's coming. I actually we were updating our rental comp numbers, and just some inside baseball for anyone listening. I still believe the best way to get your rental numbers is call and pretend you need to move in. And so that was the beginning of my day. And I found I had 4 different properties. I usually give myself a 2-month leeway. Hey, I want to move in December. I had 4 different properties downtown tell me that their next availability is in January or February. So they can't even do any more leases today. So it's definitely nice to hear, and definitely a on the ground sense that we do have the demand downtown for these apartments that are coming in the pipeline, and people want to live here and are continuing to seek highly amenitized product downtown.
Fantastic. Well, Peter, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, guys. Bryan, Willis, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate your time. Colliers Pittsburgh Capital Markets team. Where can folks find you? I know you guys are both active on LinkedIn. Any specific shout outs, contact information you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, you can email either of us. I'll give you my email. It's bryan.mccann@colliers.com. We in LinkedIn, please, join or request us, and the Colliers Pittsburgh website for myself. I'll kick it over to Willis. He can give you his.
Same avenues for me. You can find me on LinkedIn, or my email address is willis.croker@colliers. That's willis.croker@colliers.com.
Fantastic. We'll be sure to include your contact information as well in our social posts when the pod gets released. Gentlemen, thanks again. Really appreciate it. I thought there was going to be a little more fist fighting here between Cleveland and Pittsburgh, but we played nice. So thank you.
Wow. Maybe if you have us back, Peter, we'll go for a round 2. We'll take the gloves off a little bit.
We may need a round 2 here. Round 2.
Because we really haven't dove into the metrics, which I think is interesting for both of our markets, but maybe that'd be a good follow-up because, we can start talking about the metrics and things that we're seeing as well there. So.
I love that idea. Maybe it's a year-end Pittsburgh versus Cleveland metrics discussion. Truly.
Hopefully our football team will even up the series.
Willis, Bryan, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, guys.
Take care.
Absolutely.
Guys.
It's a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.